Carlson tonight. One thing about tragedies, they reveal people for who they actually are. In the past 24 hours, we've learned a lot about our media and political classes. Over the weekend, our country endured two separate and horrifying mass shootings. One of them was in El Paso, Texas. The other, as you know, in Dayton, Ohio. Between them, at least 31 people were murdered. Two massacres back to back. So it's tempting to look for themes that connect them. They may exist, but they're not political. We know that. One gunman appeared to be something of a right-winger. The other supported Elizabeth Warren. So there's no obvious ideological lesson to draw from all this. Yet that hasn't stopped the usual power-hungry morons from trying to leverage human pain for political advantage. Watch the vultures circle.
You don't get mass shootings like these. You don't torch mosques. A president who's given people permission to do that, and that's exactly what's happening in the United States of America today.
It is very clear that this kind of hate is being legitimized from on high.
White supremacy is a domestic terrorism threat in the same way that foreign terrorism threatens our people. And it is the responsibility of the President of the United States to help fight back against that, not to wink and nod and smile at it and let it get stronger in this country.
This echoes the kind of language that our president encourages.
I want to say with more moral clarity that Donald Trump is responsible for this.
So 31 are dead tonight, and the only thing that these people can think about is how to terrify Americans into voting for them. These are our so-called political leaders. They're disgusting. They're also totally unimpressive, unequal to the task of fixing a society that on some days, like today, for example, seems on the verge of collapse. Maybe that's why they spend so much time trying to divert our attention from America's actual problems. They don't want to talk about what's really making us sick. They have no answers. They'll tell you it's about Trump or guns or white nationalism or Russia. It's all a joke. These people are not serious. They're children. So maybe tomorrow night we'll join one of the debates now in progress on cable news. We'll defend our centuries-old Bill of Rights against the growing mob in Washington. We'll be happy to do that, by the way. We've done it before. We'll do it again. Our ancient freedoms are always worth defending. But for tonight, for right now, we'd like to take a break from all that, a respite from the partisan circus to think more broadly about what's actually happening here. Nobody really believes this is about Donald Trump or assault weapons. If only it were that simple. Our problems are far deeper than that. So what's the real diagnosis? James Howard Kunstler, one of our wisest cultural observers, summed it up this way, quote, "This is exactly what you get in a culture where anything goes and nothing matters. Extract all the meaning and purpose from being here on Earth and erase as many boundaries as you can from custom and behavior, and watch what happens, especially among young men." Kunstler's right. Young men are the problem. Many of our boys are living in what Kunstler describes as an abyss of missing social relations. No communities, no fathers, no mentors, no initiations into personal responsibility, no daily organizing principles, no instruction in useful trade, no productive activities, no opportunities for love and affection, and no way out, end quote. So that's the real problem, and every one of us knows it. Our leaders are too cowardly to say so, but the signs are everywhere. Mass shootings are just the final manifestation of the problem. Suicide rates for young Americans are the highest ever measured. Millions are dependent on drugs, legal and illegal. 15% of all millennials still live at home with their parents. 50 years ago, more than 80% of American adults this age were already married, living with a spouse. Today, fewer than half adults between 25 and 34 are married. A huge proportion of American young people are not in any kind of relationship at all. So it's not surprising that millions of them feel helpless, miserable, and alone because they are. They lack friends or parents or religious organizations to give purpose and moral coherence to their lives. They live in a suffocating culture that they feel no control over. Local identity and local institutions are the weakest they have ever been in this country. Most people think our democracy is fake because in some ways it is. The policies they live under, the jobs they hold, even their personal opinions are totally controlled by the tech monopolists, the media scolds, Washington bureaucrats, people far away. America is supposed to be a free country, but millions of young people look around and they feel like they're trapped in a stagnant dystopia. In an environment like this, a few people will lash out in violence. Millions of others will simply fade away from suicide or overdose or diabetes. The real crisis, the one that produced these horrifying scenes on television over the weekend, is that. It's a long-term crisis. It's been unfolding for decades. Washington is happy to pretend it's not happening at all, but it is happening, and you can't ignore it forever. Andrew Pollack is the father of Parkland shooting victim Meadow Pollack. He's the author of the book, Why Meadow Died, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Pollack, thank you very much for coming on.
Well,
so we wanted to take a break before we... Thank you. We're going to dive into the question of gun control and media control and the internet and all of that tomorrow night. But for right now, we want to just take a step back and ask the broader question. Why do you think this is happening, mass shootings like this?
Well, in my point of view is it happens a lot with these kids while they're juveniles, of not showing them accountability when they're young. You know, you have to get these kids when they're still in high school or younger, when they're committing crimes or acting out, and show them some of these kids need to be introduced to the judicial system in order to point them in the right direction. And we lost that over the last years, accountability. And that plays a big role in it. And another big role is the media frenzy when something like this happens. Like you said, these politicians jumped on this on these events to push their political agendas, and the victims aren't even in the ground yet. They're not even buried, and they're pushing an agenda without even looking at the facts of what went wrong. Like with my daughter, every channel and every politician jumped on that bandwagon of gun control, and I took a step back with some good friends of mine that are politicians, like Rick Scott in Florida and Ron DeSantis. And we looked at the facts of what went wrong in Florida, and we're making a big difference in Florida with making our communities safer and our schools. So I say you got to take a step back, let the police do their job, look into what happened so we could prevent future shootings. But by just pushing an agenda, that's not going to solve anything. And they're pretty pathetic, and like you call them, morons. That's the way I look at them also.
Well, I think it's literally true in a lot of cases. But shameless morons, demagogues. What is it like to be the parent of a shooting victim and watch the death of a child be leveraged by politicians and their lackeys in the media as some sort of political talking point or metaphor for a power grab? What do you think of that?
To tell you the truth, Tucker, there's no words that I could put on it to tell you how it affected me when my daughter got murdered. And my daughter was a victim. That's why I'm so damaged of what happens with these people, and I take it so personal. When I think of somebody sitting in that Walmart hoping to get saved, like in El Paso, and there's no one coming in to save you. They're just sitting there like my daughter did on the 3rd floor. So to push a gun control agenda and take our rights away from victims, like I'm not going to be a victim. No one's going to take my rights away from me, Tucker, because I want to be there to help I want to be there for my loved ones. I couldn't be there for my daughter, and my daughter just got shot at point blank like a lot of these other victims. So to me, it's very important that we're able to defend ourselves in a mass shooting situation. And to tell you about how I feel, I might as well have been shot that February 14th with my daughter, because my life, it's over once you bury a daughter. You're never the same when you bury a child. And I wish there were words of encouragement to anyone in these mass shootings that are burying a child or someone they love. But really, it's a pain that you just learn that you have to live with. And that's it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, there's no answer to that at all. But as to why this is happening and the phenomenon, which is accelerating, of mass shootings, do you think that we're addressing the root causes of it?
There's a lot. One of the causes, I think, is there's no fear of consequence to when they commit these horrific crimes. Like my daughter's murderer is still sitting in a cell waiting to go to trial. To me, I think we need to expedite in situations like these mass shooters. I don't think we need to wait 2 years for a trial. I think we could have a trial within a month and just execute these people where there is a consequence. To go to prison to these evil people, which they are evil, it doesn't seem like there's a consequence. And accountability when they're younger. Some of these kids need the right direction in life. And if you don't hold them accountable when they're younger, it just sets them up for failure. So Mental illness is a big thing, too, with these young kids. So there's numerous things that we could be doing if we just look into the facts and don't push an agenda.
I think that's exactly right. Andrew Pollack, thank you for that. I appreciate it. So, as is the case after almost all of these shootings, in the case of the Dayton shooting the other day, people came forward to describe years and years of frightening behavior by the apparent shooter, Connor Betts. Clearly, mental illness is a major component in a lot of these violent rampages. The FBI says that 70% of mass shooters show signs of mental illness. It's almost never discussed on television for some reason, and that's a shame. James Fitzgerald is a retired FBI criminal profiler. He's the author of the book series, Journey to the Center of the Mind. He joins us tonight. Thanks very much, Mr. Fitzgerald, for coming on tonight. So, mental illness, it almost seems like, by definition, plays a role in these shootings, a central role. Is it a specific kind of mental illness?
I'm going to answer that, Tucker, but real quick, hats off and kudos to the officers who responded to the scene. I watched some of your show last week with the officers in New York getting water sprayed on them and their self-control, while the officers in El Paso and Dayton certainly used their self-control to minimize the situations in both of those places. So hats off again to them.
Amen. Yes.
There have been studies over the over recent years, certainly by the FBI, my former unit, and some of the folks I used to work with there, who did a very excellent study about these exact type of shootings, active shooters, mass shooters, what have you, and at least 64 of those different incidents back to 2000. And in about 65% of those cases, there was some component of a mental health issue. Whether it's been previously diagnosed or not, that's another story. But these weren't necessarily the people that were suffering from psychoses or deep schizophrenia, where they were, bundled up in a corner in fetal position. These are people who could function every day. They had some depression issues, anxiety, certainly paranoia, but they basically functioned in society. They looked and walked and talked like you or I, but just at some point something clicked within them. A bunch of factors came together in their heads, outside external stimuli, and they decided to act as they did. And as we've seen in the last week, 3 separate shooting incidents.
So is there some comprehensive effort to figure out exactly what went wrong mentally, what the signs are of someone who is exhibiting behavior that could ultimately become dangerous, as distinct from someone who's just eccentric or sad? I mean, is there any attempt to really systematically figure this out?
Well, sure, and a lot of people are eccentric, a lot of people are sad in this country, and for that matter, around the world. Remember, it's not limited to just the U.S. The biggest mass shooting of all was in Sweden in 2011. So, and we had Christchurch and, of course, Sri Lanka earlier this year, unfortunately. So these things happen worldwide. And not everyone who has some sort of a mental illness or an issue in that regard is going to react violently as these people do. It has to be a combination of all the planets aligning and their moons aligning. I'm talking from a mental health perspective, with external stimuli, with access to weaponry, with other small peer groups that only are basically bubbles of the same kind of people who think the same way they do. And then, again, throw in this mental health issue with perhaps lack of parental background, perhaps lack of other intimate relationships with people. And Tucker, something I haven't heard anyone else talk about in these 3 shootings is the phenomenon of incel, involuntary celibacy. And I can't rule out that these people, if they don't want to admit it or write about it in their alleged manifestos, perhaps they're also suffering from this, and that is that young men who don't feel qualified to date or be in intimate relationships with the women they'd like, so they take it out on other people. Yes. They may camouflage it and say, oh, it's about Hispanics invading our country, or people at a garlic festival, or a guy actually shooting his sister and her boyfriend. What's that all about? Who was involved in crazy misogynistic type music, a porno grind. I never heard that term before researching your show. So there's all kinds of complex factors here that can't be ruled out yet. It's way too early in these 3 shootings, but I wouldn't be surprised if something like incel played a role in it. It did with Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, we found out years later, although that term wasn't even around back then.
Yeah, and it's not enough to just dismiss it as toxic masculinity and tell men to shut up. There's a huge problem with young American men, and nobody wants to deal with it, and clearly we need to. James, thank you very much. Good to see you.
You're welcome.